Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you all for joining me today. I am going to be talking about building a decentralized app or DApp over the course of this stream. I am really excited. This is my first time using YouTube Live actually, so it should be fine. It'll be a totally smooth experience. It just means that this is kind of a new chat experience that I haven't used before. So I am monitoring the chat over to my right-hand side. So feel free to go ahead and chat with me, say hello, pop in any questions that you have. Preferably they are all blockchain and DApp related. We'll kind of stick to that today. But yeah, I'll just go ahead and start with a quick introduction first about myself. My name is Megan Lewis, and I am a senior program manager on the Microsoft Reactor team. What I do is really focus on creating and delivering learning experiences centered around emerging technologies. So I am a blockchain enthusiast. This has been one of the topics that I have really focused primarily on since I've joined Microsoft a year ago. Today actually is my year anniversary of joining Microsoft. So that's also exciting. Something else to celebrate today, as well as trying out YouTube Live. So yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm always happy to talk about blockchain, outside of the stream as well. I'll leave my contact information so folks can always feel free to reach out and chat about anything. But let's go ahead and share the agenda for today. So just kind of going to start with an overview. We're going to talk about what is a decentralized app, talk about different tools to use to build DApps such as Drizzle, which is a big one that's part of the Truffle suite that we're going to use today, NBS Code, which I'm kind of always showing off, as well as the Azure Blockchain Development Kit, Ganache, and Truffle, also part of the Truffle suite. So those are going to be the main tools that I'm using. If you want to follow along, those are tools that you need to have. But I'll go through that when we get to that section as well. Then I'm going to get into building the first DApp with the help of Drizzle and kind of talking through all of the different components around there. And then we're going to wire up a smart contract with our Drizzle DApp. And then finally, just kind of close with some Q&A. I always have that at the end, but of course, please ask me questions throughout and please talk to me throughout. That is what's going to make this session a little bit more exciting and interactive. So decentralized apps, I guess let's just go ahead and get into it. Decentralized apps, are DApps for short, are really what brings smart contracts to life. So I've done a lot of other streams and workshops and such, created kind of content for our Microsoft Learn platform, which I'll show off later, really focusing on kind of, learning the fundamentals of blockchain technology and, starting to build out your own solutions with the help of smart contracts. But the DApps portion is really kind of what brings your solutions to life. It's what's going to allow people to interact with and execute transactions on your network. DApps are used in everything from games to supply chain management to financial transactions, pretty much everything, that you have a blockchain solution for. It could be a really good idea to create some kind of DApp and interactive UI for your users to interact with your solution. So the possibilities of DApps are really endless. And what I want to do today is to kind of showcase, the importance of DApps, talk about a little bit more about, the details and kind of the inner workings of them, and then also to showcase some tools and how you can just start building your own DApps. So let's go ahead and talk about, and I'm going to switch over to my browser, but let's go ahead and focus on learning a little bit more about DApps. And I'm going to post a link there in the chat and head over to my browser. So the link that I shared is for the Ethereum developer documentation. And there's some really good information here as far as, really anything Ethereum and blockchain related. But I find myself kind of coming back to these docs, especially when I am curious and kind of want to start exploring some new area. This is always a good resource to come back to. So a decentralized app, or DApp, is an application built in a decentralized network where it has a front-end user interface, which is typically well, typically, and what I'm going to show today, it's going to be a JavaScript app, specifically a React JavaScript app. So there's some front-end user interface combined with a backend, which is going to be a smart contract. So it's a little bit different from, a traditional web app in the sense where what you're connecting to in the backend is this decentralized network. Prereqs, I think that this is important that I didn't really explicitly call out before learning about Dapps. Like, you should kind of understand the basics of blockchain and understand, how this distributed ledger is working, how transactions and blocks are being added to the ledger. So all of that is kind of an important prereq to note from the beginning, but it's okay. If you don't have that, we'll kind of cover it today. And again, ask anything that you like. So let's talk about the definition of a DApp. So a DApp is decentralized. So that means that, they execute independently on a decentralized network. They're not controlled by a centralized authority. They are deterministic, which means that they perform the same function independent of which environment executes the code. So I think this is a really important part of a DApp, and I think any application that basically you are expecting the same output from whoever or whatever environment is executing your code. It is Turing complete, which means that these DApps can perform any action which can be coded. They are isolated, so they can be executed in a virtual environment known as the Ethereum virtual machine, and that's what we're going to be using today. This is really nice, especially during development, so that you can really start to identify any bugs or other problems that can, negatively affect your application. And let's talk a little bit about the benefits of DApp development. So outside of providing a way for users to interact with the blockchain network in a really easy and visual way, DApps also provide the additional benefits. They have zero downtime, they provide privacy, they are censorship resistant, they provide data integrity, and verifiable behavior. So I won't read through all of that since you can see it there, but those are just some of the other benefits of DApps, again, besides kind of just allowing folks to actually interact with your network. There's still kind of the same security and privacy elements that come into play. These are applications that are traditionally always up with zero downtime. There is not a lot of risk for kind of malicious actors to take down your app. So that is all good things. I think just a few more things that you could read about down here if you're following along is that some implications of DApp development, and these are some things to consider with, I guess the downsides of maybe using DApps is that there can be more maintenance. I think just in general, when we think about smart contracts, it's generally harder to update those. And so typically the way that you are going to want to develop these applications, your whole solution really from smart contracts to your DApps is that you kind of want to do a lot of that. You always want to do your testing up front, but it's really, really crucial in the case of decentralized applications that you kind of make sure that your application logic is set, that you're not really expecting a lot of changes to happen over time, just because it's a little bit more of an effort to update your smart contracts and your DApps, as opposed to like a traditional application, a traditional web app. And then, some other things like performance overhead are good to consider, as well as network congestion, like how many folks might be using your application at one time. And I think, when you're on a development network like we're going to be today, this is a really complicated thing to test out. But as you move into a test network, it can be a lot easier to kind of start to get a feel for this there and try to actually determine how much traffic that your network can handle. If you have lots of people using your application at one time, that is kind of a perfect place to try to test the limits of your application in the test network. And then user experience, it may be harder to engineer user-friendly experiences. We'll see some of that today. I think especially some of this might depend on, the amount of experience that you have with actually developing front-end JavaScript apps. But yeah, there is work that kind of goes into really making nice user-friendly apps. And sometimes you have to put a lot of work in that for it to be kind of really nice and friendly looking. We're going to see a couple variations of Dapps today that are like, they work very well. They're not very snazzy, but that's totally okay. So this article is also going to describe some different Dapp tools. As some of those I think can be helpful. I'm going to highlight a couple different tools, but that's all good. So yeah, I think again, this is a really great documentation site to come and kind of explore different topics, starting with Dapps, what we're exploring today. So next, I'm going to transition over to looking at some different tools for Dapp development. So I'm going to highlight the Truffle suite, and I'm always a big fan of the Truffle suite, so we are going to start there. But what we are going to use today is first Drizzle. So Drizzle is this collection of front-end libraries that make it really easy for us to write Dapps through the help of React, which is a nice front-end library that is used really commonly and in tech companies. It's created by and maintained by Facebook, for example. So that's what we're going to be using. And this is something that I haven't introduced before. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. I'm also going to be using Truffle as the development framework for Ethereum. And then I'm going to be using Ganache, and particularly Ganache CLI, the command line interface version of this Ethereum blockchain server. So those are pretty much the main tools that I'm going to be using, along with VS Code and the blockchain development kit for Ethereum. And this is going to be what I use to do things like build and deploy my contracts. So just want to kind of call that out. Those are all the tools that I'm going to be using. So if you do want to follow along, it's best that you have all of these. It's going to be the easiest. If you don't have them now, it's probably not worth trying to download them as I'm speaking, but you can totally feel free to start, because I am going to take a moment talking a little bit more specifically around Drizzle. So Drizzle is fun to use. I would say it's a little bit more sophisticated than some of the other tools in the suite, like Ganache or even like Truffle. I think that there are some more different components that Drizzle is integrated with, right? So I mentioned React in particular, which is going to be that, that front-end JavaScript library that we're using. So if you're like me, I wasn't really familiar with React so much, having like not a lot of experience with just front-end development in general. So that's just something to consider, as well as just when you look at the features. I think even taking some time to understand the different features and what all this means will help you understand and know how to use Drizzle. And I'm just going to kind of talk through it, but I think once we go into the tutorial, it's probably going to click a lot more together. But Truffle also has really good documentation and really nice tutorials, which I'll show off too. So first, let's talk about the data store. So the data store is really what's going to allow you to use your contract, your smart contract data. So we use a Redux data store. Drizzle uses a Redux data store by default, which is really nice to help synchronize your contract data with the UI. So I think that's a really important part of these Dapps is kind of making sure that your front end is communicating really nicely with the back end, the smart contracts, and it's kind of capturing all of the transactions that are happening on the back end and making sure that those can be displayed and updated in the front end. So just keeping everything in sync is the big thing there. Next, we would look over to the right here around maintaining underlying functions. So Drizzle extends Web3 1.0's contracts, so you have access to all of those methods and properties and such. So Web3 JS is the Ethereum compatible JavaScript API, which is really going to allow you to interact with your Ethereum network. I guess let's move down here to talk a little bit about this. You can also use an existing store. So by default, it's going to use that Redux store that I mentioned up above there. But you can also use a different data store, an existing data store. It's really up to you and kind of the solution that you're most comfortable with and the amount of work that you want to do to ensure that your data is going to be synchronized and everything's going to work as expected. But by default, you are going to use Drizzle's Redux store. And then finally, the component library. So I think this part is also a really cool feature to highlight. But there is this component library, Drizzle React Components, which is a set of basically UI elements that you can use to interact with in your app. So I just clicked into this documentation shortly. And what you can do here is really kind of interact with different components. So there's going to be this loading container, which we're going to use to essentially help load our app. But this kind of is explaining that it's going to show a loading screen until Drizzle and Web3 makes this, until Drizzle and Web3 are initialized. Then there is contract data, so we're going to be able to interact directly with our contract data, essentially, and then there's this contract form. So the contract form component is what we're going to use to actually help us display data. So that's kind of the important part to know there. Again, this is all going to come together nicely once we start actually using it. The last thing that I'll call out while we're here is that Drizzle's architecture is modular. So you can kind of pick and choose the pieces of Drizzle that you want to use. Again, like there are more components, more features to Drizzle than there are to some of the other parts of the Truffle suite. And I think, you know, that can at first be maybe a little bit, I'm going to say intimidating. I think it honestly can, because you're like, okay, there's all these different parts. How do they work together? What do I need to use? I think it's important to just remember that you don't need to use it all. So kind of just looking at this diagram here, we can see that Drizzle is built off of Web3, Redux Saga. And then you can use Drizzle on top of that. Typically you are going to use Drizzle. Then you can use React, which is going to provide basically these different components to make it easier to connect your React app. There's this React components library, which is going to kind of provide all of those other common Dapp functions that we just went through to actually display data. So, I mean, it's kind of up to you. I think to get started with, we'll explore this a little bit and see what you might want to use. And so to do that, and kind of for our first tutorial, and I'll step into this NBS code and we'll take time to step through the code and just see what's happening here. So I went ahead and posted that link in the chat. So what I'm showing here is this Drizzle box. So there is this whole set of boxes available over here at trufflesuite.com/boxes. And so really what these boxes are boilerplates or templates that can contain really helpful tutorials, all the way up to complete Dapp. So there's lots of different examples here of different boxes that you might want to use. So basically they are going to give you kind of complete projects that you can use and learn from. So we're going to just use the Drizzle box. There are other Drizzle related boxes that you can see up here, but feel free to explore those later. For now, we're going to focus on the Drizzle box. So this Drizzle box does use Drizzle, Drizzle React, and Drizzle React components. So this is kind of giving you the full overview of Drizzle's capabilities and what you can do with them. So this is kind of showing you everything at once rather than using these kind of libraries one at a time, for example. But there are some other Drizzle boxes, Truffle boxes that you can use that will kind of show you more simplified versions. So what this is going to do, and I'll probably jump over to the tutorial rather than like keep talking about what all this stuff is going to do. But I'm basically kind of going to follow some of these steps here. But at this point, if you do want to follow along, you are going to need Node as well. I didn't call that out, but you would also need Node because we're going to use the Node package manager and Truffle to help us unbox this. So let me just go over to my terminal now, and then we can start working on the project there and kind of looking through the components. So, and I'll just pause for a moment and see if there are any questions so far. I probably just threw a lot of information at you. So please let me know if there are any questions before I get into the tutorial. All right, and I'm still monitoring the chat, so feel free. So I'm going to start out by making a directory, and let's just call this Drizzle Test. And let's go ahead and cd to Drizzle Test. So I just have this empty directory. And so what I'm going to do is say, we're going to use Truffle, like I mentioned. All right. And so sometimes if you're not really familiar with Truffle, it could just be helpful just to like list out all the commands that you have available to you. Sometimes I just forget personally. And so we're going to unbox Drizzle. So to unbox any of those Truffle boxes, all you have to provide is the name. And this is probably going to take just a few moments, but you should see something like this happening. So it's going to be prepared to download the box. It will start downloading. And it'll just take a minute, but after a while, we'll see that this will be successful. So just takes a couple minutes to go in and kind of set up or scaffold the project for you. And this is a little slow today. Is anyone following along with me? I'm curious about that. Let me know. And of course, let me know if you run into problems while you're following along. Okay, so there we go. We're seeing some more information down below. What I see at the bottom is I did get some JavaScript warnings or Node package manager warnings. That's all probably fine. If it's not an error, I'm just going to ignore it for now. So it went ahead and set up the box for me. So let me just first look at what it set up. And I see that there are a bunch of different directories in here: app, contracts, migrations, node modules, and so on. So essentially what happened here is that when I unboxed this Drizzle Truffle Suite box, what I got was essentially two different projects. So I got a regular Truffle project, and then I also got this React project. So that's all under app here. So I kind of get like two projects in one from doing this unboxing. So let me go and open this NBS Code now, and we'll start to take more of a look. All right, so I'm gonna look for that project that I just created now. All right, so then that is now open. And here, let me just kind of talk through what's happening. So first, let's focus on the Truffle project itself. So if I were just to create a Truffle project, so like Truffle init, that's how I use Truffle, what I would get was is some initial set of contracts here. I'll get some migrations to help me deploy those contracts, a default test, and then I also have this Truffle Config file, which is just going to describe how I'm going to interact with the Ethereum development server. So by default, this is going to use port 8545, and that indicates that I'm using Ganache CLI. So Ganache CLI, I actually should have started that up back when I was at the terminal. So let me go ahead and do that now. So what I can do to start that up is ganache-CLI. And so this is just one option that I use for a development server here. I showed Ganache GUI. Ganache GUI is a really great tool. I think that that's another option that you can use for a development server, especially if you want kind of a more visual server and if you're going to be doing development for, let's say, a long period of time and you want to like always kind of come back and be able to easily see your available counts because you're using those to test and the private keys. It's nice to maybe just have that GUI up separately, but I kind of just like to use the command line version. I think that's a little bit more lightweight. I don't have to worry about kind of like a whole nother application up, but just want to show that there are different options that you can use. But let me go back to VS Code, and I'm just going to kind of keep that running up in the background. So by default, I am using the development server Ganache CLI on port 8545. And yeah, that's how Truffle projects are just set up. So there are just a few different contracts available here. I won't go through these so much because we will see them up in the app. But this complex storage, I think, is just storing different device data, things like a brand, a year, a battery wear level. I think that's basically what it's doing there. There's this migrations contract, which is just kind of a basic contract. We're actually not going to use that one. It just comes by default. There's this simple storage contract, which just allows us to kind of store something in our database or in our ledger. I guess it's not a database, but that's what I think of when I see this contract. And then there's this simple tutorial token here using an ERC token, where really we're kind of just inheriting this token definition from OpenZeppelin. And this is really simple. All we have in this specific, I can't think of the word anymore, contract, is this constructor. So when this contract is created, we'll mint a specific amount to the contract sender or creator and this initial supply. So just kind of telling you this now because it will make sense in just a moment when I start this contract up. Probably while I'm here, I want to go ahead and use the blockchain development kit to build and deploy these contracts. So I'm going to right click on complexstorage.sol and select build, which will just take a moment. I'll see that this pops up in my bottom right hand corner that it is building. You might not be able to see that over my face, under my face. I also then open up the terminal and I can look at the output here. And I always look at the output just in case, just to make sure that everything is happening how I expect it to be. And I look through here and I see that we have compiled all of my contracts. So all of the contracts that I have defined there in the contracts directory, as well as any dependencies that I'm using, like the OpenZeppelin contracts. Cool, so we're good to go there. The one more thing that I want to do is right click on a contract to deploy it. And what I want to select to do in this option window that opened is go ahead and deploy to develop, because that is the server that I have running right now. Cool, and I see that all of my contracts deployed successfully, kind of just by glancing through this. I start to create basically my ledger. So I have my first block here with some transactions in it and so on. So now all of those will just kind of start to stack up. If I do go back to my terminal, of course, I kind of see all of the history of that as well. Cool, so that's all that I want to show off for the Truffle project in particular. Now let's go ahead and focus our attention on the Drizzle React app. Maybe I don't want to close that yet. So under app, I have quite a few things. So just like kind of some node modules that I'm going to use. There's a lot of things in here, but I think probably the important ones will be things like Drizzle, Drizzle React, for example. So next, under source, there are kind of a lot of files there. You don't have to know what all of them are right away. but it kind of helps to see them. So I'm going to work in reverse order a little bit. I'm actually just going to go ahead and start the app, and then we'll come back and explore what all of these different files are doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the terminal NBS Code itself. I have my other terminal going with Ganache CLI, but let's go ahead and just start the app. So I'm going to cd to the app directory. Just kind of confirming that I'm there. And then what I want to do is just to basically start running the app. First, I want to do an npm rebuild to just kind of go ahead and check that I have all my dependencies installed. It's going to just recompile all the changes that I might have in this app folder. And that will just take a moment. Cool, I don't see any errors, so that's all good. Lots of output, but I'm good to go there. And then let's go ahead and do an npm run start. And what npm run start does is just going to start up the React dev server for me. And then when it's done, it will go ahead and just open up my browser for me at localhost 3000. So that's happening in the background. That it's starting, and it typically just takes a few moments for it to load and for kind of all of these components to be created and instantiated. So we're like doing, loading up Drizzle and React and stuff. Cool. So this indicates that it is successful. So now let me go back over to my browser. Let's go ahead and open up our local host. All right. So this is kind of the default Drizzle React app that we get. And I see here that just kind of at a glance, first I see information about my account. So this account is going to be the very first account that I have on my development server, my Ganache CLI development server, as well as the amount available to me. So that is just some amount of Ether. I started with 100, but since that account has been running or ran a migration, there's amount of gas used for that. So amount of Ether was decremented. And then there is this simple storage contract. So I briefly showed off that contract before. Basically all you can do here is set a value. So we can set a value and see that stored value update. And that's really all that contract does. In the tutorial, or the tutorial token contract, yeah. So here it's kind of describing what's happening, but basically what you get to see from that contract is your total supply of some token. This amount of token was created when we created the contract, essentially when that constructor was called. So we have 12,000 of this tutorial token. So then my balance is 12,000. So then I can kind of interact here and choose to send an amount of tokens. So let's see, if I wanted to do that, I can hop back over to my terminal. And if I scroll back up, so this is, again, one reason why it might be better to use like Ganache GUI, for example, because however much activity I've been doing on this server, ideally I can always scroll back up and get to these accounts. Perhaps I can just kind of copy this data somewhere else and kind of leave it to the side just so I have it handy. But anyway, just one downside to know. So let's go ahead and copy this address here. And going back to my browser, I can have this to address. So I have that second user up there was my first user. And let's just say that I'm sending some amount like 1,000. And so then I'll automatically see this amount decrement from here. And then finally is this complex storage contract. I cannot remember the word for contract anymore. So, and then finally, again, this contract, there wasn't any kind of interaction even in the contract itself. So what I can see in this contract is just some metadata. So I can see some state variables. I can see information about the device brand, device year, and so on. So anyway, this is kind of just the out of the box example that they kind of give to show you, like, here is everything that Drizzle has to offer. These are some examples of how you might get started with Drizzle. So this is super helpful. And we'll come back to that as we kind of manipulate the project later and start to kind of add our own contracts in. But before I do that, let's take a moment to kind of just look through some of the important parts of this React project. So I can start up here actually. Under the contracts directory, I have all of the contracts that I've used. So after I went ahead and built and compiled these contracts, they ended up here in just the JSON format, basically just this like ABI format here, where it's kind of all of the parts of my contract, but in this nice JSON format that I'm going to use to interact with in the React project. I have just basic CSS that is given to me by default. Like there's almost no styling here, but this is basically where you would want to start if you are making a really nice and snazzy looking UI. Next is the app.js file. So this app.js is really going to contain all of the code for the main app. You can see up at top, it's basically importing all of the different components that I'm going to use, React plugin, and so on. Then it's actually importing different JavaScript files from this same project. So basically this is just going to start to instantiate everything. If I actually look down in the body of app.js, there's not so much here. It's just kind of waiting for everything to initialize, and then it's actually going to return the specific component that I want to load up. There is some testing that you can do. I don't really look at that folder too much, but it is important kind of as you start to develop more sophisticated applications. Next, let's talk about the Drizzle options file. So this is used to create an options object and pass in the desired contract artifacts for Drizzle to instantiate. So you can see just by now, by default, it's kind of just using all of those 3 contracts that we have. It's describing the it's instantiating Web3 and saying that, you know, this Ethereum server is running at this location. Also just specifying the contracts that we're going to use and any events that are part of the contract. And this is basically just going to describe what we need to listen for. So thinking back to kind of the data store and keeping the contracts in sync, it's important that we, you know, specify specifically the contracts that are going to be part of this app, as well as any particular events that we're actually looking for. So I think we're only specifying this event from simple storage because it is the only event that we have in the contract. But yeah, so that's basically what we do in here. It's just important to specify the contracts and any events or objects, as well as that Ethereum server. And I think one more thing that I want to specify for now is this my component file. So this is really going to create everything that we see in the UI in our Dapp. So there's some more kind of importing going on up above here. We use React and React components. And then I'm also then kind of creating these variables that I want to use here from React components. And then when you start to look through this, there's like kind of a lot of code here, but it's all HTML, which is pretty nice. So I won't go through all of it, but we can see that it's just kind of defining some information about the app. Up here, I have the main header, Drizzle examples. Up at the top of the app is where I saw that active account information. So I have the account address there that I get from the account index, as well as kind of how much ether they have, shown to 3 precision decimals. Then after that, there are some sections basically for all of the contracts. So there is the simple storage contract section. And this is defining, yeah, we can just look through this one, I think, and I won't go through the rest here. But first is this contract data. So this is one of the components available with the React components library. And typically you kind of start out with this kind of notation here. where you're just kind of describing that you want to use Drizzle and the Drizzle state. And then you can specify the contract and then the method. So the contract is name simple storage and the method stored data. So it might be confusing, like if you're not very familiar with that contract, but so the contract, simple storage, and then let me go back there. The method was stored data, which is this state variable basically. And it's part of this set function. So we're not actually calling the function name, we're just calling this state variable that we're able to update and get the value from directly. So that's kind of just how this simple example is working, at least with simple storage. Then there's this contract form component that we use. So here basically is where we're actually just showing the stored value. Then in this contract form is where we're kind of creating that form for us to update the value. So here again, I'm specifying the contract simple storage and the method is set. And that does correspond actually to the method that we saw, or the function that we saw in the contract, which was set. So I'm going to go back to the browser real fast, because I find that when I am kind of looking at this and exploring this, I actually have to kind of look at it to start to understand exactly what's happening. But essentially this should correspond exactly to what, or not it should, it does correspond exactly to what we saw happening back in the app. So there's some kind of like syntax that you have to understand to get a little bit familiar with what Drizzle is doing, and kind of how to kind of format and call the right parts of Drizzle that you want to be able to display the information that you want. But I think starting out at this example is a really great place to just begin to get a good idea of what's happening here. So I think I'm going to stop walking through this for now, unless there are specific questions or just further examples that folks want to go through. What I am going to start to show now is just how you would wire up a new contract example. And I kind of just want to show how to do that. And I recommend maybe thinking about this as a solution if you're new to starting out, with creating your own Dapps, is maybe starting from a Drizzle box like I'm doing, because it does kind of create this whole project for you. It gives you all of these different components that you need, rather than you trying to kind of create them all manually yourself. Or maybe, you start with the Truffle project and then you create the React project. By using a box like Drizzle, you can kind of just get everything that you need to start with. And then you can make the choice, like if you don't want to use any of this, to kind of just get rid of this. So I'm going to show what I'm talking about now. All right, so let's go. I just quit my development server because we're going to come back to that, or my React server. I'm going to close this for now, and I want to show what it would be like adding a new contract. So let's say that I want to start to integrate some of my own custom contracts that I've created. So I'm going to create a new file, and I've been working on the shipping example. So the shipping example is really just tracking the status of an item, the shipping status of an item. So I'm going to start to kind of copy over some of the code for that. I'm not going to write it all. But it's fairly straightforward just to talk about and see what's going on. All right, so this shipping contract that I just copied over, it is just tracking the shipping status. So there are 3 statuses: pending, shipped, and delivered. I have some state variables here, basically for the status and the ship status. I have a couple different functions. First, when this contract is initialized, the status is set to pending. Then the status can get updated to shipped and delivered. So that's basically what's going on. There's a lot of code, but I'm not going to talk through it all. And every time that the status is updated, I have this update state variable that I'm also updating. So that's pretty much what we have to start with. I would need a migration for that. So currently all of my other contract migrations are in this deploy contracts file. So I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate that last line and go ahead and add in a line for the shipping. And I'm adding this in, but I'm really just going to go ahead and delete all of these other contract definitions and stuff here because I don't need it. I'm basically just going to completely write over it. I'm just kind of using the scaffolding at this point that the box created for me. So I do have that. And I mean, I might as well delete them now. I don't think anything so bad can happen. It's testing, right? It's just developing for fun. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all those. Also, then what I want to do here is get rid of those other contracts as part of the migration. So essentially now what I can do is then just build this contract. And there was no output, so no output is good output. Yep, I see that it successfully finished in the background. And then I want to right click on the shipping contract to now deploy it and deploy to the development network. And I should start to see that happening here. So all of my migrations are running again. So I just have the 1 and then the 2, and now there's only that shipping contract there. All right, cool. So now I want to go over and actually update the app components. So going over to source, let's go ahead and first start with kind of creating a view, this component view, and specifying what I want to actually display from the shipping contract. So there's this my component by default. You don't need that. You don't have to call it my component, but that was just kind of what we had to start with from the scaffolding. So I'm going to call this ship component.js. And let me kind of copy over now what that part's going to look like. One second. And then we can look through what's happening in this code briefly. But it's a lot of HTML, kind of like the other one was. So it shouldn't look too different. This is just specifically for my shipping contract. So for the kind of start of this application, I'm just calling it shipping test. I'll be able to see some information, shipping status. 1 is shipped, 2 is delivered. I can see that there's some contract data here where I am using the shipping contract. I'm also using the ship status method, or this specifically is that state variable, ship status, which should be up here, which should either tell me if it's delivered or shipped. Then I can see here, this next section is basically describing the total number of updates in the contract. So I have that num updates variable that it's looking for there that's constantly going to be incrementing. And then I will be creating these contract form elements, so things that I could actually interact with. And it looks like for here, we aren't taking any input, rather, it's just kind of allowing us to select whether the item is shipped or delivered. So that's what I should be able to see there. So it's going to be a simple app that will start up as soon as I wire the rest of it. So just give me a moment. Next, we can go ahead and head over to Drizzle options. So what I want to do, I'm just going to get rid of those lines for the other contracts. And I'm just going to specify the shipping contract that I want to use. Oops, sorry. And then similarly here, I'm going to get rid of all of those other contracts. There are, well, let me see, what other events are there going to be? So event is that log new alert event, which we could look for there. I also need to change the name of this. This is going to be shipping. Okay, so then that should be all I need here. The last thing that I want to do is to go up to the app.js to specify what's getting loaded as part of this Dapp. So instead of my component, I am going to have this ship component. Cool. And then down on line 22 is where I'm actually loading that component. So instead of my component here, similarly, I just need ship component there. And that should be everything that I need. So again, there's kind of different files here, but you'll notice that I'm not really thinking about like styling right now. I'm really just focusing on kind of the crucial parts, which is the app.js, so specifying kind of what is going to be loaded in my app, the specific contracts and the Web3.js that I want to instantiate, and then as well as what I'm actually loading, which is going to be the ship component. So that's kind of what I have so far. And again, this is what I would do and kind of what I do now as I am developing Dapps. I start from this structure and just modify all the pieces that I want. So now let me go ahead and open up my terminal, and I should be at the app directory. So let's go ahead and do an npm rebuild to just go ahead and rebuild everything in this app directory. Cool. And then I'm going to do an npm run start to go ahead and start the server. And that should just take a moment. And let me go back over to my browser. I do see it still loading up. But then when I refresh, this is essentially what I see here. So very basic. I would need to put in a lot of work to make this more pretty and just even more usable. I think this is really nice because this is how I can start to interact more with my contract. I can kind of confirm that the behavior is what I expect. So here I see it starts out with total number of updates was 0. If I change it to ship, then I have another update there and the status would be update to shipped. If I change it to deliver, then, similarly, the same thing happens there. So this is just kind of a starting point for me to do a couple things. First, just get to interact with the contract and the different variables and functions inside of it to kind of confirm that everything is working. It's kind of doing what I'm expecting. Next, I would, really want to think about, again, like how to put more functionality in this Dapp. Like I think about what my users actually want, right? And they probably want to actually like know the status. Like just think about whenever you're going to track the status, like here is when maybe you would put in some information which we don't have available in the contract right now. But yeah, I think the most we can get out of the contract at this state is being able to get the status of this item. So whether it's pending or shipped or delivered. So just kind of a good starting point. I think more so it helped me get a little bit more familiar with understanding more about Drizzle and how to create these Dapps with the help of Drizzle. So I think that's about all that I wanted to show for now. I can't think if there's anything else. But yeah, so again, just a starting point. As I kind of continue to work on this example, I want to think about what I can do to make this app a little bit more usable. I probably will later then want to think about styling, but that definitely comes last. I just first want to just like kind of know everything is working as I expect it to. So, I think I'll go back to my browser and I'll just call out a couple more things. Oh, and one more thing before I do that. If I am back at my terminal, and this is just one more thing that I like to do, is kind of just see what was happening in the back end, just see what was happening on my server. I think I have the confirmation in the front end that I can interact with my contract. I think everything is being kind of synchronized and updated as I expect it to be. The last thing would just be to look actually in the logs here and kind of maybe look through some transactions, confirm that this is happening kind of in tandem with what's happening in the front end. So I would expect, over time, more transactions to be coming here. So just making sure everything is in sync is really what that means. And it's a little bit hard without having a lot of detailed information. So again, this is maybe something that the GUI would be more helpful with. But what I'm basically just looking for at the most basic level here is to know that my ledger is still being updated. I'm still constantly getting new blocks added as I'm interacting with the app. All right, so back at my browser, I think just to learn more about this, what I would recommend is to continue to kind of try out some of these boxes. So that was just kind of the most heavy-handed one that I can have. There's also just some others here that you can start to play around with a little bit more and learn from, because they are fairly easy, like you saw with the first one, to just unbox and build and deploy and start up and kind of interact with that and learn from that. So there's some good examples in here. I do highly recommend it. But yeah, I think that's about all that I have for now. So I'm going to go back over here. I don't see any questions coming in. While folks are still here, just want to thank you all for being here. We would appreciate it. I would appreciate it if you just filled out a quick survey about this stream at aka.ms/reactor survey, and the event code is there. So yeah, feel free to have to share anything there. I will also leave my contact information here in the chat, so folks can reach out if they have any questions. And yeah, I'm still here. I'm just getting links in the back, so please let me know if there's anything that comes up. All right, I will give it just a few more seconds. But yeah, thank you all again. I hope that you learned something new about Dapps today. It's always my goal that you learn at least one new thing and get to try out that thing today. Always continue learning. And I hope that you all take care and have a great day. I'll just show this a little bit. Thanks for joining.